Hello, and welcome to Boring History for Sleep. Tonight, there is no rush. There is no urgency. There is only the quiet of this room, the comfort and stillness of your bed, and the gentle, unhurried unfolding of a story from a time long, long past. I invite you now to begin to settle in. Let go of the day, with all its thoughts, its responsibilities, and its concerns. They have no place here. This time is for you. This time is for rest. Feel the weight of your body supported by the mattress, a feeling of safety, of grounding. Notice the softness of the pillow beneath your head, the gentle drape of the blankets over you. Allow your shoulders to soften, to release and fall away from your ears. Unclench your jaw. Let your eyelids feel heavy, heavy and restful. Turn your attention to your breathing. There is no need to change it. Simply observe the easy, natural rhythm of the air entering and leaving your body. A gentle rise and a slow fall. Each breath a little slower, a little deeper, drawing you further away from the waking world and closer to the soft edge of sleep. Our journey tonight takes us deep into the shadows of medieval Europe. We are not visiting the grand, clamorous halls of kings discussing matters of state. We are not walking the muddy, bloody fields of battle. Instead, we are entering the most private, intimate, and quiet of spaces, the fire-lit chambers of noble women. We are here to explore the silent, daily rituals they practiced, the strange and demanding rituals of beauty. In our modern world, we are surrounded by clarity. We see our reflections in perfect, smooth glass, in high-definition screens, in the bright, clear light of day. Our world is one of instant, precise information. The world we are visiting tonight was the opposite. It was a world lit by the flickering, unreliable flames of candles and hearth fires. It was a world of shadows, of deep, cool stone, of scents of wood smoke, herbs, and damp earth. And the mirrors they used, the looking glasses they gazed into, were not clear glass. They were discs of highly polished metal, bronze or steel or silver, that offered back only a dim, wavering, distorted reflection, a shadow of a shadow. And yet, in this world of dim reflections, the pursuit of beauty was an obsession. It was an art, a science, a religion, and a battlefield, all in one. It was a language of status, a signal of piety, and a marker of identity, practiced with a dedication that bordered on the fanatical. As we will see, these rituals were often painful, demanding, and unimaginably dangerous. So close your eyes if you haven't already, or simply let your gaze rest softly in the darkness of the room. Let my voice be a quiet guide, a gentle murmur in the background. Let your mind drift back in time, to an age of polished metal, flickering candlelight, and the strange, silent, and haunting story of the poisoned looking glass. Let us begin our journey with the most fundamental element of medieval beauty. It was the starting point for all else, the canvas upon which every other detail was painted. This was the skin itself. In the medieval mind, the single most important, most defining marker of true beauty and high social status was not the shape of the nose, the fullness of the lips or the color of the eyes, but the color of the complexion. The ideal, pursued with relentless dedication, was a stark, luminous, almost unearthly pallor. Imagine for a moment that you were walking through the great hall of a 14th century castle. The air is cool, carrying the faint, sweet smell of beeswax and the smoky tang of a distant fire. The floors are stone, covered in rustling rushes. As you pass the noble ladies of the court gathered near the hearth, you would notice something striking. Their faces seem to glow in the dim light, but not with the flush of life. They glow with a flat, uniform, matte whiteness, like moonlight on snow or a freshly painted marble statue. Their skin appears so pale, so impossibly translucent, that you might imagine you could see the delicate, spidery tracery of blue veins beneath the surface. This was not a simple fashion preference as we might think of one today. This was a powerful, non-negotiable billboard advertising one's social class. In a world built on a rigid, unmoving hierarchy, the vast majority of humanity lived and died by the rhythm of the sun. Peasants, men, women, and children alike toiled from the first light of dawn to the last light of dusk out in the open fields. Their lives were a constant cycle of planting, tending, and harvesting. Their skin was, therefore, inevitably darkened, weathered, and burned by the harsh, relentless sun. The sun was not a friend. It was a brand, a physical mark of low birth and a life of hard manual labor. A pale, white face, therefore, was the ultimate and most visible proof that you did not need to work. It signaled to everyone you met, without a single word being spoken, that you belonged to the elite, the aristocracy. It meant your life was one of leisure, of privilege. It meant you lived your life indoors, protected from the elements, within the cold, thick stone walls of a castle. A lady's worth, in many ways, was quite literally measured by how white her skin appeared. But this obsession with pallor went even deeper than just social class. It was inextricably entwined with the profound, pervasive religious devotion of the age. In the medieval mind, the physical and the spiritual were deeply connected. In medieval art, in the flat, holy images of illuminated manuscripts, in the serene faces of stained glass windows, and in the grand golden altarpieces, the Virgin Mary was almost universally depicted with skin of snow-white purity. Whiteness, therefore, became synonymous with virtue. It was a symbol of holiness, of a spirit untouched by sin, just as a noblewoman's hands were untouched by labor. To pursue a pale complexion was, in a strange way, to perform one's piety. It was a physical manifestation of one's inner purity and grace. And so, noblewomen did not just passively avoid the sun, they waged a quiet daily war against it. They would wear heavy concealing veils and wide-brimmed hats if they dared to venture outdoors, perhaps to walk in a shaded walled garden. They would stay cloistered within the castles, their skin rarely touched by a direct ray of daylight. But avoidance alone was not enough. It could not produce the stark, marble-like, utterly unnatural finish that high fashion demanded. For that, they turned to the alchemist's palette. They turned to pots of creams and pastes, to mixtures and concoctions that promised to erase all traces of the natural world, all hints of life and color from their skin. They sought to paint over their own humanity with a perfect, aristocratic, and holy mask of white. Achieving this coveted, ghostly complexion was a daily, meticulous, and sensory ritual. This was not a light, translucent dusting of powder as we might know it. This was the application of a thick, heavy, opaque foundation, a paste known by the fashionable name ceruse. Let us imagine once more a noble woman in her private chamber. It is morning. The air is cold. Stone walls hold the chill of the night. Her lady's maid, her hands perhaps calloused from the work, brings out a small, often ornate pot, perhaps made of carved wood or heavy pewter. She opens it. Inside is a smooth, dense, white paste. The recipe for ceruse was deceptively simple, known to apothecaries and households of status. It was a mixture of two primary ingredients: white lead, ground into a fine powder, and vinegar. The lead provided the dense, opaque white, and the vinegar acted as a binder, creating a spreadable paste. The maid would dip her fingers or a small piece of cloth into the pot. As she brought it to her mistress's face, the smell would be sharp and acidic, the unmistakable tang of the vinegar mingling with a faint, almost metallic odor from the lead. The paste itself would feel cold against the skin, a shocking, damp cold. The application would begin. The maid would slowly, carefully, and methodically paint her mistress's face with this toxic mixture. It was applied thickly, layer upon layer, like plastering a wall. The goal was to create a perfectly smooth, uniform, and flawless mask. Historical accounts from the era describe how ladies would apply this paste so thickly that their faces no longer looked like human skin, but rather like polished marble sculptures. This white mask would cover everything. It was painted over the eyebrows, over blemishes, over freckles, over any natural rosy color in the cheeks. It erased all signs of life, replacing them with a flat, aristocratic white. The application didn't stop at the chin. It was spread down the neck, across the décolletage, and over the hands, any part of the skin that might be visible beyond the confines of a heavy velvet gown. This was a long, slow, and tedious process. The lead paste had to be applied with great care to avoid streaks, and then it had to be left to dry. Once the mask was set, it was often heavy and unyielding. It would crack if a woman smiled too broadly or laughed too freely. This perhaps was not even seen as a drawback. It reinforced the expected demeanor of a noble lady, serene, composed, passionless, and emotionally detached. And the artifice did not always stop there. To heighten the illusion of delicacy and translucency, some women would take the ritual one step further. After the white mask was completely dry, they might use a very fine brush, perhaps made of sable, dipped in a blue pigment. With this brush, they would delicately trace faint, spidery, artificial veins onto their temples, their wrists, and their chests. This was to emphasize the supposed thinness of their skin, to create the illusion that their blood was so noble, so refined, that it was visible just beneath the surface. This daily ritual, this painting of the mask, often began in girlhood. Household accounts from noble families show that girls as young as 12 or 13 would begin these treatments, initiated into the painful and demanding requirements of their high social standing. Day after day, year after year, they would sit patiently, breathing in the fumes of lead and vinegar as they were painted with heavy metals. The key ingredient in this prized ceruse, the element that gave it its brilliant, opaque whiteness, was, of course, white lead. And lead is a potent, cumulative neurotoxin. The women who patiently set for their daily mask, who painted their skin with this coveted paste, were engaging in a slow, insidious, and cumulative act of self-poisoning. The lead did not simply sit harmlessly on the surface of the skin. Day after day, the heavy metal would slowly, inexorably seep through the pores. It would be absorbed into the bloodstream. From there, it would travel throughout the body, settling into the soft tissues, the organs, and even embedding itself into the bones. It was a poison that did not leave the body, but rather built up, year after year, dose by tiny dose. The effects were insidious and devastating. Medieval physicians were familiar with the cluster of symptoms, though they often did not understand the precise cause. They called it colica pictonum, or the painter's colic, an affliction well known among artists and craftsmen who ground their own lead-based pigments by hand. For the noble women, it would begin subtly. A persistent, unpleasant metallic taste in the mouth, a heavy lethargy and chronic fatigue that no amount of rest could cure, a loss of appetite, a general feeling of malaise. Then the more acute symptoms would appear, the agonizing, twisting stomach cramps, the colic that gave the condition its name. As the poisoning progressed and the lead settled deeper into the nervous system, the neurological symptoms would set in. A visible tremor in the hands, a wrist drop or paralysis of the limbs, and, most terrifyingly, a slow, inexorable decline of the mind. Lead poisoning caused severe cognitive impairment, memory loss, sharp and unpredictable changes in personality, fits of melancholy, and even hallucinations. We can look back at the historical record and see the shadows of this affliction. Marie de Medici, the wife of King Henry IV of France, was celebrated across Europe for her stunningly white, flawless complexion. She was also, according to her contemporaries, plagued by mysterious and debilitating illnesses, by constant fatigue, by severe digestive ailments, and by deep bouts of depression. Symptoms that modern doctors, looking back, now recognize as the classic tragic signature of chronic lead poisoning. The irony is almost too cruel to comprehend. The very substance these women used to create the illusion of perfect aristocratic beauty was actively, physically, destroying their bodies from within. Furthermore, the lead-based makeup would ravage the skin it was meant to beautify. It was a harsh chemical that caused blemishes, sores, discoloration, and permanent scarring. This, in turn, created a desperate, tragic cycle. The more the lead damaged the skin, the more ceruse was required to cover the damage it had caused. Death from cosmetics was so common that it became an accepted, almost mundane, part of aristocratic life. Medieval wills often included specific instructions for the bequeathal of a lady's beauty supplies. The will of Margaret of Anjou, dated 1482, poignantly bequeaths her collection of face paints and whitening powders to her daughter. It was a deadly family heirloom. A mother, fulfilling her duty, passing down the essential tools of status and nobility, and in doing so, passing down the instruments of a slow, inevitable, and painful death to the next generation. From the deathly white canvas of the skin, our journey now moves to the focal point of the face, the eyes. Here, too, medieval women pursued an ideal that was just as specific, just as unnatural, and just as fraught with danger. The fashionable, seductive gaze in the late medieval and Renaissance periods was not one of clarity or brightness. It was a gaze of dreamy, mysterious, and liquid depth. The ideal was an eye with a dramatically dilated, unnaturally enlarged pupil. A wide, dark pupil set against the stark white mask of ceruse was considered the absolute height of feminine beauty and allure. The medieval mind, in its reading of the body, equated a dilated pupil with sexual arousal, with passion, and with a kind of sensual availability. But it also had another, more spiritual connotation. The wide, unfocused, glassy-eyed look was associated with religious rapture, with the gaze of a mystic lost in a divine vision. It was, at once, both seductive and holy. To achieve this very specific look, women turned to the potions of the apothecary, and specifically to a plant with a fittingly beautiful and sinister name, belladonna. The name itself is Italian, meaning quite literally, beautiful woman. The plant, however, is more commonly and accurately known as deadly nightshade. It is one of the most toxic plants in Europe. Let us imagine a Venetian duchess in her opulent palazzo, the air heavy with the scent of canal water and incense. She is preparing for an evening banquet, a masked ball. Her servant comes forward with a small dark glass vial containing a deep purple liquid, a distilled extract of the belladonna berries. Using a small dropper, the servant would carefully, precisely squeeze a single drop of this potent toxin directly onto the duchess's eyeball. The effect would be almost immediate. The atropine contained within the nightshade is a powerful muscle relaxant. It would instantly paralyze the tiny, intricate muscles in the iris that control the pupil's response to light. The pupil would dilate, opening wide, dark, and deep, unable to contract or protect itself. The duchess would blink rapidly through the intense, stinging, burning sensation as her eyes began to water uncontrollably. But she would endure it, smiling through the agony, knowing that for the next several hours her gaze would be utterly captivating. But this alluring gaze came at a terrible, immediate price. The most obvious side effect was a profound and agonizing sensitivity to light. With her pupils fixed permanently open, she could not control the amount of light entering her eye. Bright daylight would be a blinding, painful torment. This forced many noble women who used belladonna to become essentially nocturnal, living their lives in the dim, forgiving light of candles and torches, appearing only at evening events. Even more devastatingly, her vision would be completely and totally blurred. The same muscle paralysis that dilated the pupil also prevented the lens of the eye from focusing. The world would become a hazy, indistinct, dreamlike wash of color and light. She could not see clearly, could not read, could not recognize a face from across the room. And this was just the beginning. prolonged, regular use of belladonna would lead to what physicians of the time called beauty blindness. The toxic alkaloids would cause progressive, cumulative, and irreversible damage to the optic nerve and the structures of the eye, leading slowly but surely to permanent, total blindness. Women were spending fortunes to quite literally and quite knowingly poison their own vision, all for the sake of a fleeting, fashionable, and blurry gaze. While the eyes were being chemically altered to appear wide and vacant, the very framework of the face was being physically and painfully reshaped. In the 14th and 15th centuries, a strange and specific fashion took hold, an obsession that would seem utterly bizarre to us today: the pursuit of an unnaturally high, broad, and completely bare forehead. If you were to wake up one morning, look in the mirror, and decide that your hairline was at least 3 inches too low, it would sound like a waking dream. Yet for a fashionable medieval woman, this was a daily pressing concern. The ideal was not a normal forehead. It was to have a hairline that started far back, near the crown of the head, creating what contemporaries described with admiration as a 5-head, or even more impressively, a 6-head. The desired look was a smooth, high, egg-like dome, serene and uninterrupted. This was not, of course, an accident of genetics. It was a deliberate, painful, and meticulously maintained process of hair removal. The logic behind this trend was fascinatingly, if strangely, precise. Popular medieval texts on physiognomy, the pseudoscience of judging a person's character and intelligence from their facial features, explicitly stated that a high, broad forehead was the clearest possible sign of superior intellect. It was also considered a marker of noble character and refined aristocratic breeding. Therefore, women of high status began to literally reshape their faces to advertise their intelligence. This was a PhD tattooed on the skull, but infinitely more painful. The process was, by all accounts, agonizing. Wealthy ladies employed specialized servants known as pluckeresses, a term for professional hair pluckers. Their entire job, their sole profession, was to maintain their mistress's artificially high hairline.
Let us imagine this scene. A noble lady sits for hours, day after day, in her chamber. She is perhaps reciting prayers or listening to a musician play the lute, anything to distract from the monotony and the pain. Her pluckeress stands over her, tweezers in hand, methodically plucking every single hair from the mistress's forehead, one by one by one. The process, according to contemporary records, could take up to 6 hours at a time, and it had to be repeated constantly as the hair grew back.
Physicians of the era, like the Italian Taddeo Alderotti, wrote in their medical treatises about regularly treating noble ladies for the inevitable consequences of this practice: chronic infections, raw skin, painful inflammations, and permanent, ugly scarring caused by this overzealous daily plucking. And the plucking did not by any means stop at the hairline. It extended downwards. The eyebrows, too, were seen as an interruption to this smooth, intelligent dome. They were plucked into thin, high, barely there arches, or more often and more fashionably, removed entirely. Portrait analysis from the 15th century workshop of Jan van Eyck shows the ideal woman as having this serene, otherworldly, egg-like face, completely devoid of eyebrows, and with a hairline receding to the heavens. To make the process faster, or perhaps just more permanent, some women turn to even more extreme measures. They would use caustic depilatory substances, pastes made of lye, quicklime, and other harsh chemicals to permanently destroy the hair follicles. These concoctions would burn the hair away at the root, but just as often, they would leave severe chemical burns and permanent disfiguring scars on the skin. But even this was considered preferable to the social humiliation of appearing with a low or peasant forehead. The pressure was, as always, immense. Now, as we rest in this quiet exploration of the plucked and polished European face, let us allow our minds to drift. Let us travel gently, leaving the courts of Paris and Burgundy behind. Let us journey eastward, across the glittering sea, to the shimmering golden heart of the Byzantine Empire and to the opulent courts of medieval Persia. Here, in this world of silk, incense, and intricate mosaics, we find a beauty standard that is precisely, strikingly, the opposite. In Western Europe, women spent hours upon hours in agony, removing every trace of their eyebrows to create a smooth, blank canvas. But in Constantinople, a fashionable, high-status woman would spend just as long, with just as much care, creating them. Here, the unibrow was the ultimate beauty goal. Yes, you heard that correctly. A single, continuous, unbroken eyebrow stretching boldly and gracefully across the forehead was considered the pinnacle of sophistication, intelligence, and allure. Picture, if you will, a wedding feast in 13th century Byzantium. The air is rich and heavy with the scent of exotic spices, cardamom, and rosewater. The room glitters with the light of 1,000 candles reflecting off gold leaf mosaics. And as you scan the room, you see that every beautiful, noble woman looks as though she could have stepped from a portrait by Frida Kahlo. Their eyebrows meet in the middle, creating one bold, dramatic, and deliberate line across their foreheads. This, like the pale skin of the West, was deeply and profoundly symbolic. According to the writings of Byzantine historians, such as the Princess Anna Komnene in her 12th century work, the Alexiad, the monobrow was considered a clear and visible sign of great intelligence, deep passion, and, crucially, of fertility. Women who were naturally blessed with connected eyebrows were seen as touched by good fortune, as gifts from heaven. But for the vast majority who were not born with this blessing, an entire industry existed to create the illusion. Medieval beauty manuals from the region, such as the 11th century Taqwim al-Siha by Ibn Butlan, contained detailed recipes for unibrow enhancement. The most popular method involved mixing a dark cosmetic powder, often kohl or powdered antimony, with a binder, such as egg white or gum arabic. Then, to give the artificial bridge a realistic texture, fine, dark goat's hair would be mixed into the paste. This paste would then be carefully, artfully painted into the space between the natural eyebrows, creating a perfect, seamless bridge. This was a sophisticated process, not a crude daub. Court records from Constantinople describe professional brow artists, men and women, who would meticulously measure a woman's face to create the ideal proportioned unibrow. It had to be just right. Too thick, and it looked overly masculine. Too thin, and it looked incomplete and unfinished. The unibrow was also fascinatingly tied to superstition. In many cultures of the region, it was believed to be connected to the evil eye. It was seen as a powerful protective talisman, a shield that could ward off bad luck, jealous spirits, and the envious glances of rivals. Even Byzantine religious art, a reflection of the highest ideals, embraced this standard. 11th century mosaics in the Basilica of San Vitale in Ravenna, for example, show the powerful Empress Theodora with a clearly defined and noble monobrow. But like its Western counterparts, this practice was not without its significant dangers. The kohl and antimony powders were often heavily contaminated with lead and mercury. Antimony sulfide, the core ingredient for the dark pigment, is toxic. With prolonged daily use near the eyes, it could cause severe eye infections, chronic inflammation known as brow fever, and, in some cases, eventual blindness. Let us allow our minds to travel once more, drifting back to Western Europe, to the cold stone castles of the late 14th and 15th centuries. We have explored the intricate details of the face, the pale, leaden skin, the wide, poisoned eyes, the high, plucked forehead. Now we turn our attention to the body, the form itself. And here, the ideal becomes even more extreme, more otherworldly, and more haunting. Imagine walking into a grand, vaulted cathedral for a royal wedding sometime around the year 1480. The air is thick with incense and the sound of Gregorian chants. As the noble ladies of the court file in, their velvet gowns whispering over the stone floor, you are confronted with a chilling sight. The congregation looks like an assembly of the undead. These women look as though they have just emerged from their tombs. Their faces are not just pale, they are almost gray. Their cheeks are dramatically hollow, their temples sunken. Their eyes appear huge and dark in their sockets. Their bodies are so unnaturally thin that they appear skeletal even beneath the heavy, voluminous folds of their gowns. This was not the result of plague or famine. This was not a sign of poverty. This, incredibly, was the pinnacle of high fashion. This was the corpse bride aesthetic. From roughly 1400 to 1520, this deathly, gaunt ideal dominated the high societies of Europe, particularly in Burgundy and France. It became so pervasive, so desirable, that contemporary writers noted it in their diaries. The Florentine merchant Giovanni Rucellai wrote in 1457 that a woman who appeared too alive, too healthy, too robust, with rosy cheeks and a full womanly figure, was considered vulgar, common, and utterly inappropriate for polite company. Achieving this corpse-like appearance required a level of devotion and self-denial that bordered on the masochistic. The process, as we will see, was one of deliberate, systematic starvation. But the motivations were fascinatingly different from our modern concepts of dieting or body image. This was not about control, and it was not about self-punishment. It was about achieving a profound and very specific spiritual and aesthetic state. The logic, though twisted to our minds, was deeply religious. In the medieval worldview, the body and the soul were in a constant struggle. The body was earthly, sinful, and drawn to worldly pleasures like food, comfort, and warmth. The soul, on the other hand, was divine, pure, and yearned for heaven. Therefore, if you looked too healthy, too robust, it suggested that your body was winning the battle. It suggested you were overly concerned with earthly pleasures. But if you appeared to be slowly wasting away, if you were gaunt, pale, and ethereal, it was seen as visible, undeniable proof of your spiritual refinement. It demonstrated that your soul was so pure, so focused on heavenly matters, that you had barely any need for worldly sustenance. This ideal was modeled on the mystics and saints of the age, such as Catherine of Siena. Catherine died in 1380 from the effects of her own extreme holy fasting. Her emaciated, corpse-like appearance was not seen as a tragedy, but as evidence of her absolute holiness, her rejection of the world. And so, noble women, in their own way, sought to emulate this holy, wasting, and beautiful look. The pursuit of this hallowed, deathly form was a ritualized, daily performance of self-denial, a competition in spiritual aesthetics. The corpse bride look was achieved through a grim trinity of methods. The first and most important was starvation. This was not a casual diet. This was a deliberate, prolonged, and celebrated act of fasting. Beauty manuals and household records of the day refer to it as the Great Emptying. Noble ladies would consume almost nothing for weeks at a time, perhaps subsisting on nothing but watered-down wine and, fittingly, the communion wafer. The goal was not just weight loss, it was to achieve a specific look of physical deterioration, a skeletal gauntness that mimicked the early, tragic stages of consumption, or tuberculosis. This white fever, as it was sometimes called, was tragically romanticized, as it produced exactly the kind of ethereal, delicate, and wasting beauty that was considered the ideal. The second method, used to enhance the first, was controlled bloodletting. To heighten the pale, drained, and bloodless appearance, women would regularly visit a physician or surgeon. We can read the dry, factual medical journals of Fernando Alvarez de Toledo, the personal physician to the powerful Queen Isabella of Castile. He documented without comment how the Queen would have exactly 3 ounces of blood drawn from her arms every single week. This was not for any diagnosed medical ailment. It was, in his own words, to maintain her celestial translucency. The third method was cosmetic, a way to enhance the illusion of starvation. Court inventory records from the period list some truly morbid beauty supplies. We find shadow powders, which were made from finely ground charcoal, or, according to some more lurid accounts, the burnt and powdered wings of bats. These dark powders were not used as eyeliner. They were carefully, artfully smudged into the hollows of the cheeks and under the eyes, creating artificial dark circles and enhancing the gaunt, skeletal structure of the face. The social pressure to maintain this look was absolutely crushing. The Burgundian chronicler, Olivier de la Marche, wrote in his memoirs about the social rituals of the court. He described witnessing young noblewomen dressed in their heavy, elaborate velvet gowns, their bodies weakened from weeks of fasting, collapsing from sheer hunger during long, tedious court ceremonies. But these fainting spells were not met with alarm or concern. They were not seen as medical emergencies. Instead, the woman who had fainted would be gently revived, and later she would be praised. She would be complimented on her dedication, her refinement, her spiritual commitment. Fainting from starvation was, quite literally, a fashion statement. The irony, as we look back, is staggering. These were the wealthiest women in Europe. They had access to the finest foods, the rarest spices, the best medical care available at the time. They lived in fortified castles, protected from the hardships of the world. And they were choosing, deliberately and competitively, to starve themselves, to drain their own blood, and to paint their faces with shadows, all to look as though they were dying. It was a public performance of piety and status, a competition to see who could look the most ethereally deceased while still technically being alive. As we continue our strange journey through these lost ideals, we move from the body's form to the mouth. And here we encounter what is perhaps the most bizarre, the most counterintuitive, and the most shocking of all medieval beauty standards. We are conditioned in our modern world to see a bright, white, even smile as a sign of health, youth, and beauty. In medieval Europe, at least for a significant period, the absolute, precise opposite was true. The most fashionable, the most sophisticated, the most high-status smile was one you would never, ever want to see today. A smile full of blackened, rotten, and decayed teeth. To understand this, we must first transport ourselves to the court of Queen Elizabeth I of England in 1588. The court is alive with celebration, feasting, and music, marking the famous defeat of the Spanish Armada. The Queen herself, a figure of immense power, of intellect, of majesty, opens her mouth to speak, to greet an ambassador. And the ambassador, Don Bernardino de Mendoza, is struck by a horrifying sight. The Queen's teeth are completely black. Not just stained or yellowed, but coal black, rotting in her gums, with several missing entirely. And this was not seen as a flaw. This was not a source of shame. This, increíble, was her ultimate status symbol. The logic, when unpacked, is flawless, if absurd. In this era, sugar was an almost impossibly expensive luxury. It was imported at enormous cost from distant lands. It was, quite literally, worth more than its weight in gold. Most peasants, most common people, would never taste pure sugar in their entire lives. Therefore, to consume so much sugar so regularly that your teeth rotted out of your head and turned black was the most ostentatious, the most undeniable, and the most impossible to fake advertisement of your incredible, staggering wealth. It was, as the source text notes, conspicuous consumption taken to its most painful and absurd extreme. This trend of sugar mouth swept through the European nobility. And, as with all high-status trends, those who could not afford to achieve it authentically would fake it. Wealthy women who couldn't afford enough sugar to naturally rot their teeth would buy sugar paint, a thick, sticky syrup of concentrated sugar and molasses that they would apply to their teeth specifically to accelerate and encourage decay. Others, even further down the social ladder, would fake the look of decay using dangerous cosmetics. Beauty manuals from the 15th century contain recipes for tooth-blackening compounds. These were noxious pastes made from things like lamp soot, iron filings, and vinegar, which women would voluntarily paint onto their healthy teeth to mimic the fashionable, wealthy rot. But the most extreme practitioners took it a step further into the realm of self-mutilation. Historical records from the court of Catherine de' Medici describe a procedure where court physicians or barbers would deliberately file down healthy teeth to create artificial cavities. These freshly drilled holes would then be filled with a black paste, perhaps made from crushed beetles and tar, to create the perfect patterned look of decay. Some Italian aristocrats even developed a checkerboard smile, alternating one black, decayed tooth with one white, healthy one. The pain, of course, must have been excruciating, constant, and life-altering. Diaries from the period describe weeks of sleepless nights, of agonizing, throbbing pain from deliberately damaged teeth. Yet, women continued the practice. The social pressure was too great. To appear in public with a full set of healthy, white teeth would have been a social humiliation, an open admission of poverty, a sign that you could not afford life's sweetest, most destructive luxuries. While some women of the court were busy meticulously blackening their teeth, others were focusing on their lips, obsessing over a look that was just as dramatic and even more directly lethal. The ideal lip was not a subtle, natural, healthy pink. It was a shocking, dramatic, vibrant, blood-red pout. And like so many other medieval beauty standards, this one was deeply entwined with complex symbolism. A perfectly red lip was, of course, a sign of youth and passion, but it was also, strangely, linked to religious devotion. The deep blood-red color was believed to represent the blood of Christ, making the cosmetic act a strange secular form of piety. A woman could, in her own mind, justify poisoning herself as a religious act of remembrance. And poison it most certainly was. The ingredients used to create these deadly, vibrant lip colors read like a medieval witch's shopping list. The most popular and prized recipe, documented in monastery texts and apothecary manuals, called for a base of cinnabar. Cinnabar is a beautiful, brilliant red mineral. It is also, however, pure mercury sulfide. This toxic mercury was often mixed with red lead oxide, more lead, to enhance the color's staying power. This deadly paste might then be mixed with wax or fat to make it spreadable. Let us paint a picture that the source provides, one that would make any modern toxicologist faint. Imagine Lucretia Borgia, the famous Duchess of Renaissance Italy, preparing for a papal banquet in 1498. Her servant carefully applies what looks like blood-red paint to her lips. But as you lean closer, the source alleges, you might notice the mixture is steaming slightly, and where it touches her skin, there is a faint sizzling sound. This isn't just makeup. It's a chemical weapon disguised as a beauty enhancement. The application was, in itself, a daily dance with death. The sensation was not pleasant. Contemporary accounts describe that the lip cosmetic was not considered strong enough or effective unless it caused a distinct burning, stinging, and slight swelling of the lips upon application. Women would paint this on, often until their lips bled from the chemical burns, the blood mixing with the cosmetic to create what was described as the perfect Christ red. Throughout the day and night, women would habitually lick their lips to maintain the color's intensity, or they would simply ingest the cosmetic as they ate and drank. They were, in effect, swallowing massive amounts of heavy metals, lead and mercury, every single day. Physicians of the day were all too familiar with the results. They documented a condition they called rouge madness. This was, quite simply, acute mercury poisoning. caused by the ingestion of lip cosmetics. It led to severe neurological symptoms, uncontrollable tremors, hallucinations, violent mood swings, a decay of the mind, and, eventually, a slow, agonizing, and truly mad death. And what of love? What of intimacy? The social pressure to maintain these deadly red lips was absolute. But the manuals of the time and the letters between husbands and wives reveal a tragic detail. Husbands were often warned not to kiss their wives for several hours after the lip paint was applied. This was not out of respect for the makeup to avoid smudging it. It was because the toxicity was so high, the chemical compounds so harsh, that the cosmetic could cause immediate, painful chemical burns to the man's mouth and tongue. It is a strange and haunting image. A woman made so beautiful by the standards of her day that she had become literally too dangerous to kiss. Let us pause for a moment and consider the full sensory world of the medieval court. We have focused primarily on the visual, the sights of pale skin, dark eyes, and red lips. But now let us turn to the air itself, to the scents that filled these cold stone halls. Imagine, as the source text suggests, entering a grand banquet hall in 1475. Before you see the tapestries, before you see the flickering torches, you are struck by a physical force. It is a wall of scent, an overwhelming, suffocating, and chaotic cloud of competing fragrances. The air is so thick with perfume, so potent that your eyes immediately begin to water, and you find it difficult to take a full breath. This was the world of medieval perfume. This obsession with extreme, overpowering scent was not just about covering up poor hygiene, although in an age of infrequent bathing and crowded, unsanitary cities, that was certainly part of it. Medieval perfume was a complex, multi-purpose tool. First, it was believed to be a form of medicine. In an era haunted by the Black Death, disease was thought to be carried on miasma, or bad, corrupt air. A powerful, potent perfume was believed to create a protective, fragrant shield around the wearer, literally warding off illness and death. Second, and most importantly, it was an unambiguous olfactory demonstration of wealth. The stronger, the more complex, and the more exotic your scent, the more obvious your access to the rare, incredibly expensive ingredients required to make it. We are not talking about simple flower waters. We are talking about ingredients that came from the furthest corners of the known world. Ingredients like ambergris, a waxy, precious substance harvested from the intestines of sperm whales. Civet, a pungent, musky secretion from the glands of an African cat, and musk from the glands of Tibetan deer. These ingredients cost fortunes and were part of a vast global trade. And then there were the other ingredients, the binders and the bases. The perfume recipes preserved in beauty treatises from the era are terrifying. They call for these exotic musks to be mixed into a base of aqua vitae, or pure alcohol, along with mercury, lead acetate, and arsenic compounds. People were, quite literally, dousing themselves, their clothing, and their hair in solutions of heavy metals and poison. The application was total. A noblewoman's morning perfume ritual could take hours and, according to some records, required servants to wear protective clothing to apply it. Every single piece of clothing, from the linen undergarments to the heavy outer robes, would be saturated. This created what contemporary chroniclers described as scent wars at court. Noble ladies would viciously compete to wear the most powerful and overpowering fragrance. The goal was not subtlety. It was complete olfactory domination of any room you entered. The medical consequences were, predictably, severe. Physicians of the day documented a condition they called perfume madness. This was neurological damage, hallucinations, memory loss, violent mood swings caused by the prolonged inhalation and absorption of these toxic fragrance ingredients. Some nobles even drank small amounts of their perfume mixtures, believing it would make their breath and even their sweat smell appealing, poisoning themselves from the inside out. And in a world lit by open flame, these walking, alcohol-drenched nobles were also a constant and terrifying fire hazard. Having explored the face, the features, and the very air, let us now turn our full attention to the body silhouette. As we look at the art of the 14th and 15th centuries, as we gaze upon the portraits and tapestries, a strange and unmistakable shape emerges again and again. Look at any painting from this period. Look at a depiction of the Virgin Mary in an altarpiece, a portrait of a noble lady, or even a figure from mythology. You will notice that almost every single woman, regardless of her age or marital status, shares the same distinctive physique. A high, rounded, and noticeably protruding belly. A shape that looks exactly like the middle or advanced stages of pregnancy. This was not an artistic quirk. This was not a regional anomaly. This was the blessed silhouette, the most intentional, most dominant, and most widespread body modification trend of the era. And the most shocking truth is, the vast majority of these women were not actually pregnant. This was a fashion that deliberately, artfully, and publicly simulated pregnancy. The ideal for a noblewoman was not to look thin or athletic. It was to look permanently, perpetually, and optimally fertile. A woman's body was seen as a vessel, and her primary duty was to produce heirs. This fashion was a way of advertising her reproductive capabilities 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, whether she was actually pregnant or not. But, as with all medieval ideals, this was also deeply rooted in theology. The pregnant belly was seen as a symbol of spiritual abundance, a sign of a woman's capacity to nurture both earthly life and divine life. It was, above all, a constant walking homage to the Virgin Mary, the most revered woman in the medieval world. It was a way of honoring her blessed condition. To appear with a flat stomach, by contrast, was seen as unfashionable, undesirable, and perhaps even a sign of being barren or impious. To achieve this blessed silhouette, women wore an entire, complex infrastructure of padding and undergarments. This was not a simple pillow stuffed up a dress. This was an engineered system. Wardrobe inventories from the French court, such as those of Isabella of Bavaria, list multiple types of belly padding. There was a light morning pregnancy for casual private wear, and a full-term ceremonial bump, much larger and more dramatic for important state functions and feasts. Fashion manuals from the 15th century contain detailed technical instructions for creating the perfect pregnant shape. They describe using layers of quilted wool padding, specially shaped and stiffened with wooden frameworks, and even, according to some texts, inflatable bladders made from pig intestines, which could be filled with air to achieve the perfect rounded protrusion. The most bizarre and telling irony of this trend was how it affected actual pregnancy. When a noblewoman was genuinely pregnant, her natural belly, her real baby bump, was often not pregnant enough. It failed to meet the exaggerated, perfect, high and round shape demanded by the fashion. Therefore, genuinely pregnant women were often forced to wear additional padding and wooden frameworks on top of their real pregnancy, just to achieve the correct fashionable silhouette. Court physicians of the time, such as Henri de Mondeville, wrote about treating pregnant women who had injured themselves, constrained their breathing, and possibly harmed their unborn children by wearing these heavy, restrictive, artificial bumps over their actual ones. It was a fashion that had become more real and more important than reality itself. It is a fascinating contradiction of the medieval mind that while one fashion trend demanded the soft, rounded, abundant look of perpetual pregnancy, another, competing ideal was emerging at the very same time. This ideal was the absolute opposite. It was rigid, architectural, and inhuman. It was the pursuit of the wasped transformation. This was the obsessive, agonizing pursuit of an unnaturally, impossibly tiny waist. We are not talking about the tight lacing of the Victorian era, which, as extreme as it was, seems almost gentle by comparison. This was the dawn of the corset, and in its earliest, most brutal forms, it was less a garment and more a machine. Let us imagine a scene described in the source text. A countess in a Flemish castle in 1456 is being dressed by her servants. It takes no fewer than 6 attendants to do it. What they are putting on her is not clothing. It is, by all descriptions, a medieval torture device disguised as an undergarment. It is a contraption of rigid vertical metal stays, hardened leather bands, and stiff, unyielding whalebone, all connected by a complex system of laces and, in some cases, pulleys. These were known, terrifyingly, as body engines. Tailoring manuals from the 16th century, such as Libro de Geometría by Juan de Alcega, contain detailed, technical, architectural drawings for these devices. They show mechanical components, internal structures that could be tightened not just with simple laces, but with cranks, gears, and screws, all designed to achieve the maximum possible compression of the human torso. The goal was not just to cinch the waist. The goal was to physically, permanently alter the body structure. It was to literally reshape the rib cage, to compress the lower ribs and force them inward. And to be most effective, this process, this bone restructuring, had to begin in childhood. Guild records from the era show that girls as young as 8 years old would be fitted with their first shaping stays. These were miniature versions of the adult devices, designed to gradually compress their soft, developing bones to alter their growth during their formative years. Parents were, in effect, having their children's skeletons professionally and painfully reshaped to fit a future fashionable ideal. The resulting silhouette, as seen in portraits from the era, was utterly inhuman. A waist so tiny it looked as if it could be snapped in two, combined with an artificially enhanced bust and hips created through strategic, contrasting padding. The goal, as contemporary accounts suggest, was not to look like an attractive human being. It was to look like a beautiful insect. This mechanical transformation required an entire infrastructure to support it. The extreme, rigid silhouette made normal furniture unusable. Specialized chairs, couches, and even carriages had to be designed and built to accommodate women who could not bend at the waist. The household accounts of Anne of Brittany show that the cost of simply modifying her living spaces to accommodate her body-shaping devices cost more than maintaining a small army. It was a fashion that literally reshaped the world around it, just as it reshaped the women who were trapped inside it. The daily, moment-to-moment experience of wearing one of these body engines was a constant, quiet, and agonizing battle against the body's own biology. The compression of the torso was so extreme that taking a full, deep breath was physically impossible. Breathing became a conscious, shallow, and difficult effort, confined only to the very top of the lungs. Eating a full meal was likewise out of the question. The stomach and digestive organs were so compressed that they had no room to expand, forcing women to subsist on tiny, bird-like portions. This perhaps was seen as a convenient side effect, as it reinforced the other fashionable ideal, the corpse bride aesthetic of fasting. The health consequences, as documented by court physicians of the time, were predictable and absolutely devastating. They wrote extensively in their detailed medical journals of treating noble ladies for what they called the crushing sickness. This was not a specific disease, but a collection of chronic ailments caused by the severe long-term compression. Internal organs, the liver, the stomach, the intestines, the kidneys, were displaced, pushed dramatically up or down from their natural positions in the abdominal cavity. Ribs were permanently damaged, bent out of shape, or even, in some cases, cracked or broken by the extreme mechanical force. Chronic internal bleeding was common. Personal diaries from the period, such as that of Isabella of Aragon, are filled with daily, mundane entries documenting fainting spells, chronic weakness, digestive failure, and what she called the crushing pain, a pain that was simply an accepted, non-negotiable part of her daily pursuit of the perfect silhouette. But perhaps the most terrifying aspect of this practice was the permanent dependency it created. After years of being held in this rigid, artificial, external framework, a woman's own core muscles, her back and abdominal muscles, would atrophy, withering away from disuse until they were too weak to support her body on their own. Furthermore, her internal organs would have shifted so permanently that removing the device was physically dangerous. Court physicians like Fabricius Hilbanus wrote in their surgical treatises about women who, having worn these devices for decades, literally could not survive without them. To remove the mechanical support would cause a total internal collapse. These women had become prisoners within their own fashionable architecture. They were, in the most literal sense, inseparable from the machines that were slowly, methodically crushing them. The line between fashion and a permanent, life-threatening medical emergency had blurred completely and then vanished. It was a pursuit of a silhouette that cost women their health, their comfort, their mobility, and in many cases, their lives, all for a shape that was as artificial as it was agonizing. Let us now look upwards. Above the crushed waists, the pregnant bellies, and the pale, painted faces. Let us look to the hairstyles that crowned these fashionable figures. And what we find, once again, is not something natural, but something architectural. In the 15th century, particularly at the famously extravagant and fashion-forward court of Burgundy, hairstyles became towering, fantastical, and gravity-defying sculptures. This was the era of the famous hennin, a tall, conical, steeple-like hat, often with a long floating veil attached to the plight. But the hennin was just one of many structural creations. We are talking about hair towers that could be, according to contemporary accounts, over 4 feet tall. These were so elaborate, so tall, and so unwieldy that they created logistical nightmares. Noble women literally could not walk through normal-sized doorways. Castles and palaces of the era had to be renovated, with special, taller entrances constructed specifically to accommodate the fashionable hairstyles of the court ladies. These were not, of course, made entirely of the woman's own hair. That would be impossible. They were complex, heavy constructions built on a hidden foundation of wire frames, whalebone scaffolding, and padding made of horsehair, sheep's wool, or any other available material. The woman's own hair, often supplemented with large amounts of false hair, was stretched thinly over this massive internal structure. These hair sculptures were then decorated with an absurd level of fantasy. They were pinned with jewels, wrapped in silk, and draped with floating veils. But some accounts describe even more elaborate additions: working miniature windmills, tiny gardens with live potted flowers, and even, incredibly, small gilded cages containing live chirping birds. This was not hairstyling. It was, as the source notes, engineering, and it was a full-time job. A noblewoman employed a team of hair architects, specialized servants who would arrive before dawn to begin the slow, laborious 4 to 8 hour process of constructing the day's hairstyle. And here is a detail that always makes one pause, a detail that speaks volumes about the medieval relationship with hygiene. Many of these elaborate, complex hairstyles were never taken down. They were simply too complicated, too expensive, and too time-consuming to create daily. So they were left in place for weeks, or, according to some accounts, even months at a time. Women had to sleep sitting upright in specially designed chairs or beds, their necks aching under the constant heavy load of this structure. The physical toll was enormous. Medical texts from the period describe a common ailment they called tower neck. This was chronic, debilitating pain, and in some cases permanent arthritic damage to the cervical spine, caused by supporting these massive, heavy constructions day and night. And the hygiene, as you can imagine, was devastating. These warm, matted, unwashed constructions of wool, horsehair, and human hair, glued together with waxes and oils, became breeding grounds for lice, fleas, and other vermin. Court physicians wrote of treating noble ladies for scalp rot, a term for severe, festering infections of the scalp caused by these unhygienic, unmovable hair towers. The smell was often masked by drenching the entire structure in pounds of overpowering toxic perfume, but the health consequences were unavoidable. And of course, in a world lit by open flame and torches, these tall, flammable towers of wax, oil, and hair were a constant and terrifying fire hazard. From the absurd, precarious heights of the hair, our journey now travels to the other extremity. Let us look down, past the gowns, past the floor to the absurdity of the feet. Here we find one of the most debilitating and widespread fashions of the late Middle Ages, the poulain. You have likely seen them in medieval drawings and illuminated drawings. This was not a mild or subtle fashion. These were medieval elf shoes taken to a dangerous and competitive extreme. This fashion became so potent, so exaggerated, that it had to be controlled by the law. In 1363, sumptuary laws were passed that strictly regulated the length of a person's shoe points based on their social class. A commoner or a peasant was limited to a point of no more than 6 inches. A knight or a lower-ranking noble could extend their points to 12 inches. But the highest nobility, the princes and dukes, their shoe points could legally extend up to 24 inches. That is 2 full feet of empty, pointed, and utterly useless shoe extending beyond their actual toes. The construction of these shoes required genuine engineering expertise. Shoemaking guild records from London describe specialized craftsmen known as point masters, whose entire profession was dedicated to creating the internal support structures made of whalebone, wire, or hardened leather that prevented these absurdly long empty tubes from simply collapsing. Walking in these was, as you can imagine, nearly impossible. To prevent constantly tripping and falling, the pointed tips of the shoes were often attached to the wearer's leg, just below the knee, with a delicate silver or gold chain. Noblemen and women had to develop an entirely new way of walking, a strange, high-stepping, shuffling gait just to navigate a room. Special servants, called point-bearers, were sometimes employed whose sole job was to walk ahead of their master, lifting and guiding the extended tips of their shoes over stairs, thresholds, and other obstacles. But the dark, hidden secret of the poulain was not just the difficulty of walking. It was the permanent, irreversible damage it inflicted on the human foot. To properly and fashionably fit into these long, narrow, aggressively pointed shoes, the human foot itself had to be reshaped. Guild records and medical texts from the period described foot preparation. This was a process that began in childhood. Children as young as 7 would have their feet tightly, painfully bound, their toes forced together and elongated. In some cases, to achieve the most fashionable, narrow shape, their toe bones would be systematically broken and reset to create a foot that could properly wear the extreme shoe. Medieval shoemakers were, in effect, performing crippling surgery without anesthesia, deliberately deforming the feet of the nobility for the sake of fashion. Physicians wrote extensively about point foot, a condition of fused bones, hammer toes, and massive bunions that left people completely unable to walk without their specialized, deformed shoes. They became prisoners of their own footwear. The Church, for its part, was unequivocal and furious. Pope Urban V issued a papal bull in 1365 specifically condemning poulains, calling them Satan's hooves. The reason was not just their vanity, it was practical. The extreme points and the chains attaching them to the knee made it physically impossible for the faithful to kneel properly during prayer. And in a final, tragic absurdity, the fashion proved deadly. Chronicle accounts from the Battle of Nicopolis in 1396 describe how French knights, dismounted from their horses, were unable to flee or even fight effectively because their fashionable pointed armor shoes made running impossible. They were cut down by the enemy, dying in battle not from a lack of courage, but from tripping over their own ridiculous footwear. We have now seen women poison their skin, blind their eyes, starve their bodies, break their feet, and crush their ribs. But there was another, perhaps even more extreme and permanent practice, one that turned the skin itself into a canvas for art, pain, and status. This was the practice of decorative artistic scarification. This was not random self-mutilation. This was cicatrication noble, or noble scarring. A highly refined, highly skilled, and incredibly expensive practice of deliberately, artfully scarring the skin in intricate, beautiful patterns. The resulting scars were not seen as blemishes. They were seen as the highest form of artistic beauty and a profound testament to the wearer's sophistication.
Let us imagine a scene from a German castle in 1482. The Baroness Margaret von Habsburg lies perfectly still, perhaps biting down on a leather strap, her room filled with the acrid smell of searing flesh. A specialized craftsman, a master artisan, commanding an enormous fee, stands over her. He is using heated metal tools, razor-sharp cutting implements, and intricate templates to burn and cut elaborate flowing patterns into the skin of her arms and shoulders.
This was a process that required the same level of skill and precision as illuminating a manuscript or smithing fine gold jewelry. Guild records from Nuremberg show that these scar masters were among the most respected and well-paid artisans of their time. Archaeological excavations at castles have uncovered complete scarification kits, including heated metal stamps with heraldic designs, razor-sharp cutting tools, and even templates made of precious metal to ensure perfect, symmetrical patterns. This practice was, of course, a clear and undeniable testament to one's incredible wealth, to be able to afford the master artisan. But even more so, it was a testament to one's supreme, aristocratic pain tolerance. Personal diaries from the period, such as that of Blanche of Lancaster, describe the intense preparations for a scarification session. Days of fasting, deep prayer, and the consumption of opium-based tinctures to manage the blinding, unbearable agony of having elaborate patterns burned and carved into one's living skin. The healing process was just as important and just as painful as the initial cutting. This was scar cultivation. Medieval beauty manuals contained detailed, horrific instructions for how to tend the wounds. This involved deliberately rubbing salt, harsh wine, or even powdered glass into the fresh, open wounds. This was done to irritate the flesh, to prevent a clean, flat healing, and to ensure that the resulting scars were as raised, as dramatic, and as visibly impressive as possible. These scars were not just decorative, they told stories. Noble ladies would have their entire family histories, their heraldic symbols, religious narratives, or even romantic poems scarified onto their bodies. The Empress Agnes of Poitou, for example, reportedly had the complete text of the Lord's Prayer carved in Latin script across her back, a process that would have taken dozens of agonizing sessions over many years. And, as with so many other practices, this was deeply connected to religious devotion. In an age that revered the suffering of Christ and the martyrs, many women viewed their voluntary, decorative suffering as a form of spiritual practice. Each burn, each cut was a meditation on divine love, a way to bring them closer to understanding Christ's passion. It was the ultimate, permanent fusion of pain, piety, status, and art, etched forever into their skin. We have spent our entire journey tonight wandering through this strange, dark gallery. We have witnessed women poisoning themselves with lead, mercury, and arsenic. We have seen them blind themselves with nightshade, starve themselves into skeletal forms, crush their own ribs, and break their children's feet. And a single, persistent, logical question emerges from the shadows. Why? The simple modern assumption is that these women were enduring all of this lifetime of pain and poison, to be attractive to men. This is the assumption that beauty is and always has been a function of romantic or sexual attraction. But here, our story takes its most ironic, its most profound, and perhaps its most tragic turn. The overwhelming body of evidence from the period, the love poetry, the personal letters, the medical texts, and the court chronicles, all written by men, reveals a shocking and profound disconnect. It suggests that men, by and large, did not like these extreme artificial beauty standards. In fact, many of them found them repulsive. Let us look at the evidence. First, the love poetry. The troubadours of 12th century France, the most celebrated romantic poets of their age, did not write odes to skeletal, white-faced women. Bernard de Ventadorn, for example, wrote passionately about women with hair that frames the face like a golden crown, a direct contradiction to the plucked, bare forehead. The Carmina Burana, a 13th century collection of poems, is filled with explicit, passionate descriptions of male desire. The poets praise women with sun-kissed complexions, rosy cheeks, childbearing hips, and an abundant flesh that speaks of health, vitality, and prosperity. They write, in short, about the exact opposite of the pale, emaciated, aristocratic ideal. Let us look at the private letters. The great 14th century poet Petrarch wrote personal letters to his friends lamenting how the artificial enhancements of the court made women less attractive, not more. In a letter to Boccaccio, he wrote about his preference for women who looked as God made them, not as cosmetics remade them. Let us look at the medical texts. Male physicians like Arnaldus de Villanova wrote extensively in their 13th century treatises about this very disconnect. They noted with a clinical eye that while noble ladies spent fortunes on toxic lead makeup and painful body modifications, their husbands, the very men they were presumably trying to impress, were often conducting scandalous, open affairs with serving wenches and peasant girls. Why? Because, the physicians noted, their natural, unadorned, healthy appearance was considered far more appealing. Finally, let us look at the court chronicles. The historian John Froissart, writing around 1400, documented numerous cases where high-status marriages failed, not due to politics or infertility, but because the husband found his wife's beauty routine physically repulsive. He describes nobles who couldn't bear their wife's toxic metallic breath from lead poisoning, her inability to eat from her extreme body compression, or her constant agonizing pain from her fashionable deformed feet. The evidence is clear. The aristocratic beauty standard was not, by and large, for men. This leads us to the final, crucial question. If they were not doing it for men, then for whom and for what were they enduring all this?
The answer to this great why is both heartbreakingly sad and surprisingly profoundly familiar. They were not doing it for men. They were doing it for each other. They were trapped in a closed, pressurized, and fiercely competitive system of female social status, a system that had taken on a life of its own, completely separate from the realities of male desire. The true audience for the lead-painted face, the crushed waist, and the 4-foot hennin was not the husband or the suitor. The true audience was the other women at court. These extreme, painful, and dangerous beauty practices had ceased to be about attraction. They had evolved into a complex, silent, and ruthless social language. They were a visual, bodily currency of power, a way for women to compete, to signal status, and to establish their position in a rigid, unmoving social hierarchy. Let us re-examine all the practices we have discussed, but this time through this new lens. A deathly pale face, achieved with expensive, toxic lead ceruse, was not saying, "I am beautiful." It was saying, "My family is so wealthy that I do not have to work in the sun, and we are so rich that we can afford to literally paint my face with poison every day." A towering 4-foot hennin with live birds in it was not saying, "I am alluring." It was saying, "My family can afford the wire, the imported silk, the padding, the jewels, and the team of specialized servants required to construct and maintain this masterpiece." An impossibly crushed wasp waist, a process begun in childhood, was not saying, "I am desirable." It was saying, "My family is so noble and has such foresight that they have been investing in my fashionable, skeletal perfection since I was 8 years old." And an elaborate, painful scar, cultivated with salt and glass, was not saying, "I am pretty." It was saying, "I possess an aristocratic pain tolerance and spiritual refinement that you, a lesser woman, could not possibly comprehend." This was the real game. This was the true competition. Household records from the period confirm this. They show that the most elaborate, the most expensive, and the most time-consuming beauty routines were primarily displayed not at mixed-gender feasts, but at all-female gatherings, at religious ceremonies attended only by women, and in private social visits between noble ladies. It was here, in these all-female spaces, that the real judging took place. It was here that status was won and lost. When Isabella d'Este spent more on her toxic cosmetics than most people earned in a lifetime, she was not trying to attract a man. She was making a cold, hard, calculated statement about her power, her wealth, and her unassailable position in that ruthless social hierarchy. It was a war fought with poison, bone, and hair. As our long journey comes to its end, as the air in these cold stone chambers begins to feel thin, let us leave these women in their quiet, fire-lit rooms. Let us picture them one last time, in the final, intimate moment of their day, gazing at their own reflections. But the reflection they saw, the image they checked, was not the one we know. They were not looking into a bright, clear, flawless sheet of glass.
That technology, that simple luxury, was not yet common. They were gazing at their faces in a piece of highly polished metal, a disc of polished bronze or steel, or perhaps, if they were incredibly wealthy, silver. The image that looked back at them was dim. It was dark. It was wavering. It was, by its very nature, distorted. This is, perhaps, the most poignant and tragic detail of all. These women were poisoning themselves, starving themselves, crushing their bones, and torturing their skin, all in the relentless pursuit of an ideal that they themselves could never, ever see clearly. They were suffering and dying for a dim, warped, shadowy reflection in a piece of polished metal. It is easy for us, resting here in the comfort and safety of our modern world, to look back on these practices with a sense of fascination and horror. It is easy to see them as absurd, as barbaric, as foolish. But the truth is, their motivations, buried beneath the lead and the lacquer, are entirely, painfully recognizable. The parallels to our own modern beauty culture are striking and impossible to ignore. We may have traded lead paint for cosmetic procedures, sugar-rotted teeth for designer handbags that cost more than a car, and hair towers for digitally filtered photos, but the game, in many ways, remains the same. The fundamental human challenges these women faced are the same ones we face today. The deep, profound desire to belong, the need to be valued, the pressure to conform to a standard set by our peers, the complex, often difficult, use of our appearance to express our identity, our status, and our power. The story of medieval beauty is not the story of foolish ancestors. It is the story of human beings. Their world was extreme, rigid, and dangerous, and so their solutions were extreme. But their underlying motivations are our own. As the source text concludes, perhaps the most important lesson from this journey is this: beauty culture is never really just about beauty. It is about power, it is about belonging, and it is about identity. When we understand this, when we see the systems at play, we can begin to make more conscious, more gentle choices for ourselves. We can recognize which practices serve our genuine well-being and which are just medieval-style status competitions disguised as personal choice. And so, our long, strange journey through the poisoned looking glass comes to its final, quiet close. We leave the scent of lead and mercury and exotic, toxic perfumes behind. We leave the cold, damp stone of the castles, the sound of suffering, and the flickering, unreliable candlelight. We have wandered for a very long time in these distant, shadowy corridors of the past, and now it is time to return. It is time to come back. Bring your awareness gently back to the present moment, back to the quiet, simple reality of your room, back to the feeling of safety and security and unparalleled comfort. Feel the simple, profound luxury of your bed, the softness of your pillow, the gentle, protective weight of your blankets. These stories of medieval madness, of pale skin and broken bones, have served their purpose. They have given your mind a place to wander, a detailed, winding, gentle path to follow. They have led you, step by step, away from the thoughts and concerns of your day, and brought you to this peaceful, quiet threshold of rest. The night is deep now. The story is over. There is nothing left to do, nothing left to think about, nothing left to analyze. There is only the darkness, the stillness, the comfort, and the gentle, inevitable pool of deep, restorative sleep. Thank you for joining me on this journey into our shared, strange, and beautiful past. I hope these tales have given you a new perspective, and more importantly, I hope they have brought you a sense of calm, a sense of peace, and a profound sense of rest. Sleep well, dream deeply, and remember, in our own way, we are all part of the same long, strange, wonderful story of being human.
Good night.